Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me. I know it's the last speaker slot. It's been a packed schedule. I've had a great time. I've listened to so many interesting talks and workshops. So thank you for joining me here today to listen to me talk about my favorite topic, content design. Just want to address the elephant in the room quickly. I know that some of you might be thinking, AI again, not another AI talk. I hope that this is going to be a bit more concrete than maybe theoretical and abstract, and I hope there'll be a couple of things that you find useful from this talk. So just to introduce myself a little bit at the beginning, so my name is Ben, I'm from London, that's why I sound like this, and that's why I speak pretty fast as well. If I start going too fast, I've had a lot of coffee today, so just give me a wave and I'll try my best to slow down. I currently lead a team of content designers at Klarna. So Klarna is an app that combines payments, banking, and shopping for consumers around the world. And my small but mighty team of content designers support all product designers, all product managers, all developers with crafting exceptional product copy. But I wasn't always a content designer. My background is actually in product management. I was a product manager at companies in Berlin and Madrid. And often in the teams I was in, I was the only English speaker. So that meant it became my responsibility by default to write all of the content for my products in English. So even though I'm only a content designer since a couple of years, content design has always been part of my responsibilities as a product manager. Just want to check actually in the audience, do we have any UX writers or content designers? Can you give me a little wave? There we go, a couple, all in a group as well, that's nice. I'll come say hi to you afterwards. So we have a couple of people whose dedicated role is in content design. Could you give me a little wave if you, as part of your role, or if you in the past have had to design content in some way, or you have to write stuff that users see? Give me a little wave. There we go. I think that's most people. So it's kind of like me in the past when I was a product manager doing content design. It's just one of the many things I was tasked with doing. So I think actually in this room, all of us are content designers in some kind of way. Why am I doing this talk? Well, first and foremost, and I know I'm biased saying this, content design is valuable. Content design is about how we present information, how we surface that information in the form of text, words, and visuals to users across digital experiences. You can have the best product in the world using the most innovative tech, but if you can't describe it to your users, if you can't guide them through the user experience, they're not going to be able to use it to do anything. The trouble is, content design is also a scarce resource. I don't just mean in terms of the fact that often where companies do have content designers, they are vastly outnumbered by product designers. Often you'll have one content designer supporting 5, 6, 7, 10 projects. I'm also talking about the fact that, as we can see in this room here, a lot of you, like me when I was a product manager, have to do content design as part of your role in addition to lots and lots of other stuff. I also know from my experience that can be tricky when you don't have a background in writing and you're not familiar with content design as a discipline. You might not have time to sit down and think about things like content strategy. In fact, when I was a product manager in the past, I didn't even know what content strategy was. Had I known, I would have approached the content very differently. So it's scarce in terms of the fact that it is often just one of many responsibilities we all have. I also know when you don't have a background in content design or writing formally, it can be really tricky to find the right words to actually do the writing. And that's where I hope this talk is going to help you a bit. Do you know what's not scarce? AI. AI is extremely widespread. It's accessible. I think we're all a bit tired of hearing about it at this stage. I think not only do we all have access to a myriad of different tools for generating text, video, image, music nowadays as well, but we're all encouraged to, or in some cases we feel pressured to keep up with AI. And I'm not just talking about in our roles, but I'm talking about in terms of product design, product management, and tech as a whole. We see so many people talking about AI everywhere. I don't know about you, but I sometimes feel like, oh my goodness, I have to keep up with this. The trouble with AI is the outputs can often be pretty low quality. This robot's an example. I asked Midjourney to give me an image of a low-quality robot, and for some reason it generated this robot standing on a diving plank, I think, which is a bit questionable. Maybe the robot felt offended and was threatening to jump off the plank. I don't know. But it can be a problem. So especially when you aren't someone with a writing background and you want to rely on AI to generate things like UX content, it can be tough to actually generate stuff that is good enough to use. Enter content design. So we're going to look at how, with a bit of content design magic, you can improve the quality of content that you generate with the help of AI. So I guess what I'm really interested in is this question: how might we use AI to scale content design? How can we use AI to get the words done, to help us find the right words? Not to replace content design, but just as a tool to help us with content design. To answer that question, though, I think we need to look back at a world in which we were all prompting without much content design being applied, without content design magic. So I think we'll go back to around February 2023. You remember when ChatGPT first became a thing and everyone was playing around with it and prompting with it. We called this phenomenon in my team problematic prompting. We found a lot of people we worked with were starting to use it to generate text for work, and they were coming to us and saying, oh, it's terrible. I can't use anything that I'm generating. The quality is just really poor. And we thought, we're finding the same, but actually, can you show us what you're putting into these tools? What prompts are you actually using to generate this poor output? And we found three broad different personas when it came to problematic prompting. The first, and this is the one that I'm definitely falling into, is the short but not sweet. I was under the impression that because ChatGPT can give you text so incredibly quickly that my instructions could be really brief and quick, it would be a very casual thing to get the text I needed. Oh, how wrong I was. I have a prompt here, for example, which is to generate some UX content, and my prompt reads, write a sentence telling users they need to verify their card to pay. Now, if you came to me as a content designer and gave me that instruction, I would pause for a second, and then I would look at you and say, I have about 30 questions before I can do this task. When you say a sentence, what kind of sentence? Is this going to appear on an interface? Is this going to be a title, a description, a button text? Which user flow is this going to appear in? How is the user feeling at this stage? What have they already done in this user flow? What are they going to do next? What language should this be in? And none of that is detailed in this prompt. So if I, as a human who does have all that context, wouldn't be able to complete this task, why would I expect ChatGPT in this case to do that task any better? The output maybe could be suitable, but I don't know in truth because the prompt is lacking so much context. We have the opposite of the short but sweet, but not sweet, and that's the give it everything you've got. This was a GIF. I think the GIF broke. It scrolls for about 20 minutes. It's one of the longest prompts I've ever seen. This was from an engineer I worked with, and he came to me and he said that the text I generate just doesn't sound very much like Klarna. He said, you've got guidelines, haven't you? So I sent him our style guide. I sent him all of the tone spectrum we have that describes how to write in Klarna's voice, how to sound on brand for Klarna. And I thought he was just going to pick and choose the parts of that that were most applicable for the text he was generating and include them in his prompt. Oh no, he included the whole thing. 20,000 words. It did cut off at some stage. I think there might also be a not insignificant cost associated with running a prompt that long. It's insane. I used the same prompt as from the previous screen, so write a sentence telling users they need to verify their card to pay, and then I just added the whole style guide, and I get this output, let's double check your card details before you pay. It certainly sounds more conversational. I mean, after all, I have given it ample instruction on how to sound like Klarna, and Klarna is at its core conversational. But I still haven't given answers to all those questions I had before. I haven't given it all that additional context that's needed. So that doesn't work. The third kind is a bit different. This is my personal favorite. I find this hilarious. The pretend you're a writer, the role play. I remember seeing a lot of very well-intentioned people on LinkedIn saying, oh my goodness, with ChatGPT, you can just tell it to act as a writer. You can tell it to act as a content designer, act as a user researcher, act as a product designer, act as a product manager. I saw one person saying act as a CEO as well, which I think is probably controversial. My team and I put this to the test, including this very simple role-playing instruction in our prompts, and seeing if it changed anything in the output compared to when we left them out, and it didn't change anything. I think role-playing can work if you're very detailed about the role you're wanting AI to fulfill, and if you're building a custom model, but certainly doing it on such a simplistic level as we saw a lot of people doing, and a lot of people still doing, doesn't have an impact. This example, though, was from inspired by a chap I saw on LinkedIn who insisted AI does not have the same mortal limitations that humans have. Why ask ChatGPT to act as a writer when you could ask it to act as a writer with 100 years of experience? And my first reaction to this was, well, damn, I don't have 100 years of experience. I'm not going to have 100 years of experience for another 85 years. I drink too much coffee to live another 85 years, I think, so that's not going to happen. How can I compete with that? But when I tried it, I was quite amused by the results. So here, for example, I've asked ChatGPT to act as a writer with 100 years of experience and write me a short 2-sentence description of Ryanair for a sign-up screen in Ryanair's app. And the output is, with a legacy spanning a century, Ryanair stands as the epitome of air travel innovation. I'm not going to continue reading. No shade to Ryanair, but I think even Ryanair themselves wouldn't describe the company as the epitome of travel innovation. I'm getting a budget airline flight tonight, so I hope they don't hear that and cancel my flight. All that has happened here is by adding 100 years of experience, AI has chosen more complex language. More complex language isn't user-friendly. It's the opposite. It's made the output significantly harder to understand. There's another mistake in there. Can anyone spot it? It's related to 100 years. So in that first sentence there, it says, with a legacy spanning a century. Ryanair is not a century old. Ryanair doesn't have a legacy of 100 years. Ryanair was founded in the 70s or 80s. So not only has this role-playing instruction made output that is less user-friendly, it's actually introduced lies, fairy tales. So it's caused a hallucination. That's the proper word for it. So the trouble with all of these prompts at their core is the same thing. We are only focusing on the surface level of content design being what words are we going to surface to the user, what's actually present in the UI. All of them were missing context. When we, as content designers, approach our tasks, we follow the exact same design thinking process that product designers, UX designers, UI designers, user researchers follow. We research, we investigate, we test, we experiment, we speak to users, we do all of this, and it's the process and all the insights we gain during that process that inform the surface level, the words we choose. And yet all of these prompts skipped out on all of that detail. A surface level prompt is always going to give you surface level results that you're not going to be able to do very much with. I'm just going to grossly oversimplify the product design process here. It skips out, for example, on the scope. What are we actually designing? Why are we designing it? Why is someone going to use whatever it is we're designing? What is the job to be done? What is their motivation for using this? On the structural level, these prompts don't mention anything about the flow of information. What have we communicated to the user before, and what are they going to learn afterwards? What are we progressively disclosing to them as part of the user flow? The string that I want to generate is going to be displayed in the interface alongside other strings. What will those strings say? What's the cognitive load going to be on that screen? How much does the user have to comprehend, and how easy is it to comprehend? It's only when I, as a content designer, understand all of these things that I am ready to actually think about the words and that surface level. So this got my team thinking, okay, we've got a bit of problematic prompting going on. How can we tackle that? And it leads me to technique number one. So what I'm going to share with you now is a couple of techniques that we in my team have developed that help when it comes to designing prompts to improve the quality of UX content that you generate. All of the examples I'm going to show are going to be with ChatGPT, just because I think that's one tool we all have access to. But the same techniques and the same thinking can be applied to pretty much any Gen AI tool. So our first one is the message context goal framework. This isn't an original framework. This is inspired by a framework called Message Container Goal, which I think was created by Beth Dunn, who is the author of Cultivating Content Design, which I very much recommend checking out. And basically, it's a recipe for thinking about all the things that you need to decide upon and be aware of when you're choosing the words that go into a string. So we adapted this to Message Context Goal as a 3-part way of writing a prompt that contains the right level of information for UX content. At the very tip of the iceberg, I also have to say I've seen a lot of icebergs in presentations here, and I think we as a UX community love icebergs. So it's a good theme we've got going on. But at the very tip of that iceberg, on the surface level, we have the message. None of the prompts I think we looked at had a problem communicating the message. The message is, what are we communicating with the users? What words will the user read? But below the surface, we have the answers to all those questions from context and goal that impact what the tip of the iceberg looks like. For example, how would the user express this message in their own words? What else does the user know at this stage of the product experience? How's the user feeling? If you're feeling angry or if you're feeling happy or delighted, I'm probably going to use very different language to speak to you. Where in user flow is this? Okay, yes, it's a sentence about paying by card. Is it part of a payment flow? Is it part of an onboarding flow? What is the purpose of this text? Every line of text in a product has a purpose. It has a goal associated with it. What does the UI look like? Is it a title? Is it a button? Is it an error message? All of those things have different styles of writing. So the message context goal framework for writing a prompt in 3 parts gives you a way to include the right amount of detail to generate something that is a bit better and a bit more usable. Start with the message. What meaning do you need to get across? Then expand on the context. This is going to be the bulk of your prompt. Context can include things like, where in the user journey is this message going to be surfaced? What else has the user done before? What are they going to do afterwards? What limitations are there? Are there legal limitations on this text? Are there market-specific limitations? Is there a strict character count? Is it a very small space? Mention all of that in the context portion. And then finish off your prompt with the goal. Typically in UX, the goal will be, what does the user need to do as a result of reading the string? It might also be, what do they need to know or understand, or even what do they need to feel as a result of reading the string? So my team and I started writing prompts that follow this basic framework, and we found it really did improve the quality of what we were generating, but we thought we can still do more. And this is where we became very interested in prompt engineering. Basically, what we're doing is we are changing the way we input information into Gen AI, interacting with language models, how we access the information contained within these models to improve the chances of getting an output that is better and actually fits the needs we have as designers. Prompt engineering can be defined as the process of designing inputs, and I like that it's phrased with designing here rather than writing. Designing inputs, it's conscious, to produce optimal outputs. I don't know about you, but when I hear that, I think, oh, actually, it's pretty similar to content design. Content design is essentially the process of designing information. Inputs is a type of information. They contain information to produce optimal outputs. In a content designer's case, an optimal output is action taken by a user. It's a human thing. For AI, it's a machine thing. I don't know if you've ever read the job description for a prompt engineer, but the first time I saw one, I thought, oh my goodness, that actually reads like the job description for a content designer. They're very similar. So my team and I combined this with our ethos to content design to redefine prompt engineering for our purposes. So for us, prompt engineering is the process of content designing inputs, of infusing prompts with content design thinking and insights from the design process to produce optimal UX outputs. So I'm going to share 3 more criteria, oh, not criteria, sorry, I read the screen too soon. I'm going to share 3 more techniques with you that we have found work very well in improving the quality of UX content. Each of these techniques are ones that we've done workshops on for our broader team. I think I've given sessions on all of these techniques to over 1,000 people at Klarna who now use them as part of their daily work. It's also worth mentioning I'm not going to talk about certain techniques that we have tried that we have found aren't suitable for content design. So it's not all success all the time, but because we have limited time here, I'm just going to focus on the good stuff. So the second technique after message context goal is acceptance criteria. Now, I did warn you at the beginning, and it was a warning, that I was a product manager. I love acceptance criteria. Nothing quite makes my heart sing as much as seeing a Jira ticket with clearly defined acceptance criteria for a design or engineering task. I truly think it's beautiful, especially when you see them all crossed out. It's really satisfying. I am a fan of using acceptance criteria in content design. You know when you have a dozen stakeholders and they're all discussing one line of text in your design, and it's a complex one, and all of them are saying it should say something different, and you're getting all these suggestions, and it's pretty overwhelming. It's quite normal in content design. One way to manage that is to use acceptance criteria. It's to say, hey, let's take a step back. Stop suggesting words, because that's just the surface level. The words aren't the issue here. The issue is what's being communicated. Define the acceptance criteria for the string. What does the string need to accomplish? You can align on the acceptance criteria first with your stakeholders, get the input there, and that makes it then a lot smoother when it's time to draft the actual words, because you've already aligned on what the job those words need to do is. We've got Duolingo here. We're going to continue the Duolingo theme just because I'm obsessed with Duolingo at the minute. I was trying to learn a bit of Polish, but I didn't succeed before coming here. Let's write some acceptance criteria together. So we're going to pretend we are designing the onboarding flow for Duolingo. We've got create a profile screen, very simple, but we've got the error message for passwords. So the user has entered a password that doesn't meet the requirements. It's not acceptable. We need that text, and we're going to use AI and acceptance criteria to generate that text. Now, you can actually use message context goal as a guide to drafting your acceptance criteria. Your first criterion will be, what is the message you need to get across here? This string must let users know that their entered password is not acceptable. Simple. Why do we need to tell users this? The goal. This text must prompt users to enter an alternative password that meets all requirements. And then the context, all the other bits and pieces. For example, here we have a limitation on space. This text needs to be 80 characters long, including spaces. We've got the requirements themselves. This text must also inform the user that their password must be at least 8 characters long, contain one number, contain at least one upper and lowercase letter, all of that. And this text must also be concise and straightforward in tone. It's an error message. It's not a terribly frustrating case. We don't want to be playful here. We just want to keep it simple. So straightforward and concise. Also, because it's Duolingo, I thought it might be fun to have an optional acceptance criteria that this text should include some sort of pun or reference to an owl, but I'm not so fussed about that, to be honest. Once you've got your acceptance criteria, it's super easy to write a prompt. Don't worry about reading this prompt. I promise you it contains all of those acceptance criteria, but you can see this prompt is structured in 3 parts. I've basically just put all those criteria into the message context goal framework. Start with my message. What does the error message need to communicate? Continue with the context. What are the limitations? What is the context for this error message? And then finish with the goal, which in this case is prompting users to enter a password that meets the requirements I've mentioned in the context. This is the output I get. Password must be at least 8 characters, include letters, numbers, and both upper and lowercase. Please enter a valid password. I think that's pretty decent. I've written the acceptance criteria so I can see at a glance, okay, I think that's meeting most, if not all, of my acceptance criteria. But you can go one step further and you can continue with AI and actually assess whether or not the suggested output is hitting those criteria. So you can follow up with another prompt to say, hi, ChatGPT. I have these acceptance criteria for this text. can you assess to what extent your suggestion meets my requirements? And then I've listed my acceptance criteria here. This is the output you get. It's kind of a mini QA process for validating whether or not UX content is good enough. So in this case, ChatGPT correctly identified that it had in fact met most of my acceptance criteria. It was letting users know that their password wasn't acceptable, et cetera, et cetera. It then correctly pointed out that it didn't include a reference to owls. And I was really disappointed about this because Duolingo, come on. But actually, it's an error message. It would be inappropriate here. There's not space, so I'll let that go. What this does is it makes it very easy for me as a human to judge whether or not I can use that output. If I can't use it, it makes it very clear how I need to edit it next. So especially if you don't feel the most confident with writing, this kind of gives you the guide on, OK, this is what you need to do next to edit it. You can continue to edit it with ChatGPT, of course, and ask it to fulfill all criteria, or you can take it offline. So you can use acceptance criteria not only to design a good prompt in the first place, but also to assess your output. Start by writing your criteria, define what the user needs to know, understand, and do as a result of reading the text. Design your prompt, incorporate all those criteria into the message, context, goal framework, and then use it to assess the output. Ask the tool to assess whether or not its suggestion meets your requirements. OK, that was technique number 2. Technique number 3 is few shot. Shot basically means example. It's just fancy AI speak for example. It's not a shot of espresso, which would be my preferred kind of shot, to be honest, unfortunately. Few shot is about style over substance when it comes to text generation. Few shot isn't about using examples of information that matches what you want to generate in terms of the message or the facts to be communicated. It's more about the style, the tone, the voice, the format, the word choice, all these kinds of things. I don't know about you, but sometimes it can be really difficult to describe things like tone. How should something sound? Especially when you are not a writer and you're doing content design in addition to many, many other things. You might not feel very confident about describing the exact tone you want. It can be easier to show rather than tell. So few shot allows us to use examples to generate output that is more predictable, more accurate, and more consistent in terms of style. I'm going to show you two outputs from the same basic prompt. So here, just for an experiment, I wanted to generate a brief description of the value Klarna brings to its consumers. And I wanted to see if it sounded on brand, if it was in the right tone of voice for Klarna. The first input I generated is this. Klarna provides consumers with a flexible and convenient way to pay for purchases over time, allowing them to manage their budget more effectively. Now, to me, that sounds OK. It answers the prompt. It describes the value. But it does sound a bit generic. It sounds a bit corporate. We're the pink bank. We're not corporate. Our tone of voice is not corporate. So for me, that is not on brand. So I tried this prompt again, and this was the output I got the second time. Klarna offers a seamless shopping experience, allowing consumers to shop from their favorite stores and choose their preferred payment method. There's a definite shift in tone there. This time, it's a little bit more conversational. It's striking, which is one of our tone descriptors at Klarna. You can tell through the adjectives it's used, for example, seamless. The overall word level is a little bit easier to understand. So I would judge this to be more on brand compared with that first, more corporate output. What's the difference here, given that I use the same basic prompt? Shots. For the first output, I just had the basic prompt and no examples. For the second output, I had the same basic prompt, but then I included snippets of text I got from Klarna's website that were written in Klarna's tone of voice. So by including those examples, by using a few shot prompt, I was able to influence the style of the output. This is how a few shot prompt looks. Basically, you start with your basic prompt, very simple, and then you just list out all your good examples. Your good examples don't need to be relevant to the exact prompt you're using on kind of a content or message level. They just need to match the style you want. And then your output is going to mirror that style and tone more closely than if you didn't use examples. From testing, I think we found that between 3 to 5 examples is optimal, but I think you should see a difference even by including 1 example. You might be thinking, that's great, but where do I get the good shots in the first place? Especially if you're not a writer. It looks like you're going to have to do a lot of writing to write this kind of prompt. Not at all. You've probably got a bunch of content already live that you can go use. So for example, if I wanted to write a few-shot prompt for writing button text with Klarna, I could just go to the Klarna app and take a couple of button text examples from what we've got live. You could also look at apps you think are good practice for tone of voice. So if you are designing a product, I know I keep saying app as well because most of my work is on mobile apps, but if you're designing a product that is meant to be playful and fun, maybe you'll go to Slack's website and take snippets of speech from there and use those as your shots. You could also use competitors. So for example, if I were designing content for Babbel, the language learning app, I might know that a lot of people who use Babbel also like Headspace, and Headspace does a good job at addressing them. So I could go to Headspace and take examples from there and incorporate them into my prompt. So you can use few-shot to be more consistent with the style of output you are generating. Start by finding your good examples, either from your own product or from competitor products or other products or that you see online. Create a little library for yourself as well. We have a microcopy library, so anytime we want to generate like a button text, we have a list of button texts that we can go to. And then design your prompt. Include your basic prompt and then follow up with all those shots. Our final technique, chain of thought. So to explain chain of thought, do you remember back in school when you had to do a maths exam? Our teachers would always tell us, for every question, write all of your working out. Even if you get the wrong answer at the end, if we can see you've done the working out correctly and something's just gone wrong in the process, you might still get credit. You might get half a point, so you might not get 0 marks for it. That's basically chain of thought. Chain of thought is basically incorporating a reference for a process in your prompt to guide the language model in how it comes up with its solution. Chain of thought was originally used for mathematical problems, for logical reasoning problems, for things that have a definite correct answer. So you can see here, for example, without chain of thought, on the right side, on your left, it's quite a basic math problem, and I think ChatGPT in this case couldn't answer it correctly. But if you adapt the prompt and include chain of thought, so include how you as a human might answer a similar problem, not the same problem, but a similar math problem, you see the output changes. It doesn't just give you the answer. It mimics your working out in that example, and you're more likely then actually to arrive at the correct answer. One thing that's worth saying here is, of course, there's been a lot of improvements in language models. So now ChatGPT can indeed answer basic math problems and logical reasoning problems correctly. But chain of thought is interesting. And we thought, can we apply that to text generation? Does it have an impact? So chain of thought, just to reiterate, is basically saying, here's a similar task to what I'm asking you to do. Here's how I, as a human, would do this task. I'm going to narrate the process for you. Copy my approach. Let's start with a scenario in which we need to design button text. We're going to stay on the account creation flow here, but this time in the context of Klarna. So this time, we're designing the final screen in Klarna's account creation process. On the screen, users need to enter their billing address. They've already entered all their other details. After they've entered their billing address, they will tap the button and their account will be created. We need the text for that button. So I've written a very simple prompt here to generate text for that button. By just using the basic prompt, so without chain of thought, this is the output I get. I actually get a list of suggestions. I think, oh, great. Confirm address and finish setup. Save and complete account. Set delivery address and finalize. I think we can all agree on first glance, these are pretty long text to be on a button. Buttons have very limited space. It's too many words. There are other problems here. For example, every single one of those suggestions mentions 2 actions: confirm and finish, save and complete, set address and finalize. It's not ideal. That's actually pretty confusing. A button should focus on 1 action only. So in response to my basic prompt here, I haven't generated output that's very usable or helpful. Let's try again, but this time use chain of thought as a technique. So to structure your chain of thought prompt, you are going to use a question, answer, question format. It's going to be a pretty long prompt, so stay with me here. We're going to start with Q for question. This is our example question. This is a similar task to what we're asking ChatGPT in this case to do. So in this case, write a button text for a screen as part of a checkout flow, where users are choosing their card and they will then finish and pay for their purchase. So it's similar. It's not the same. You follow up your example question with your example answer. This is where you as a human can describe to the tool, this is how I would approach this. Here, for example, I start by talking about how I identify what needs to be communicated, how I identify the message for this text. So in this case, I talk about the fact, okay, we're in a checkout flow. The user needs to choose their card. They're going to continue the payment. The whole job of this flow is to pay for a purchase. I then continue and I expand by describing how I go from identifying this need to what action needs to be taken. I include a rough draft that I know isn't good for button copy, but it's just a draft. So in this case, I talk about, okay, there's 2 actions here. Choose a card to continue to payment, and that's my rough draft. Then I include a snippet, which is actually from our style guidelines. And here I just describe what the good content for buttons looks like. So the fact that buttons should start with a verb, buttons should be focused on the whole action for the flow, on the consequence, what comes next. Buttons should ideally be 3 words or less. I get to my solution, continue to payment. So my example answer to my example question here is continue to payment. I finish my example answer with a brief line just to say why I got to this solution, to summarize it. So in this case, I just say it's short, it's concise, and it focuses on the overall action of the flow. So example question done, example answer provided. Finish your prompt then with the actual question, with the task you want to use AI for. So in this case, it's the same button text task for the onboarding flow where the account will be created when it is tapped. Here is the output I get. Instantly, you can see it's not just a list of text suggestions. It's actually mirroring the narrative that I described, how I arrived at my solution for my example. It's a little bit unnerving, I think, and dissonant to see ChatGPT talking about itself in the first person and saying, well, I decided that. I realized that I needed to identify the action. But it's mirroring my approach, and actually that makes it quite clear what the process has been to come up with the final solution. And you can see at the bottom there, the final button text it has suggested is set up account. It's short, it's 3 words or less, describes the action, the consequence, what's going to happen when I tap on that button. It's relative to the whole flow, and it only focuses on 1 action. That is good button text. So by using chain of thought, I have improved the quality of the content I have generated. So chain of thought lets us shape how language models arrive at their final solutions. Start by writing up an example. Think of a similar task. It can be a simple one. Don't make your lives complicated. How would you, as a human, design the content? Do include your drafts. Even if the drafts aren't very good, include them anyway. It's good reference. Format your prompt properly. Use the QAQ approach. Example question, example answer, and then the question you want to be resolved. And you're probably thinking, oh, that's quite a long prompt. That probably takes a lot of time to write. And you're right, that prompt took me about 20 minutes to write. That's not sustainable. But the good news is that I can reuse that prompt pretty much whenever I want to generate microcopy, because it's a similar process. So for chain of thought, you just need a couple of examples drafted up. Make a day of it. Have a little workshop. Draft up your chains of thoughts, and then you can use them for all your contexts. And that's how you can generate content that is higher quality. So with these 4 techniques, I hope I've shown you how you can infuse how you prompt, how you interact with AI in a way that starts to include insights we get from the content design process that we as human content designers would use, because all of us have to use content design skills as part of our jobs. Even if you have content designers, they're not going to be able to do everything because there'll probably be fewer in number. So it's a useful skill to have, and especially when you think, okay, I feel a bit nervous about the writing, about finding the right words, I struggle to do that. I hope these techniques can help you. Just to recap, message, context, goal. This helps you provide enough detail and the right kind of detail. Use acceptance criteria, not just to help you structure a prompt in the message, context, goal framework, but also then to carry out a very simple QA on anything you generate. Use few-shot, find your examples for more consistency when it comes to style, to tone, voice, format. And finally, chain of thought. Give a reference for how you would approach something as a human in order to shape how the language model arrives at its solution and generate higher quality outputs. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you for listening. If you are interested in any of these techniques, I know that was a whistle-stop tour through all of them, and there was a lot of text in the examples. Each of these I've written a full article for on my Medium. You can find me at Davies-Romano. I've also written on techniques that we have found haven't worked and other things, including gender bias in Gen AI. So do go and check out my Medium if you're interested in learning more, and reach out to me anytime. On the app, on LinkedIn, if you want to geek out about content design and AI. I also just want to say thank you very much to the organizers. This has been a fantastic event, and thank you for having me speak. Open for any questions.
Thank you, Ben. I think we have around 3 minutes left for Q&A. So I didn't see any questions in the app, but if anyone in the audience has a question, Angelica will go.
Thank you for a great speech. I wonder, have you tried combinations of these techniques, and were the results, were they satisfying by any way? Maybe any specific combination was successful, or quite opposite?
It's a good question. Yes, we have. We have examples of monstrous prompts that incorporate all of these and other techniques that we've developed. To be honest, I think it's limited in terms of the impact. What we find most effective is combining any of these techniques with message, context, goal. I started with message, context, goal because for us, that's kind of the foundational approach to writing a basic prompt. So I would recommend combining any of these with message, context, goal. The other thing to mention is you might find a different technique works better for a specific context. So if you find that chain of thought works great for buttons, but few-shot is better for longer form text, it's definitely worth experimenting and playing around. I recommend having workshops with your teams. Try out a couple of these things and find what works best in your contexts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, I think we have time for one more question. There we go.
Thank you for the talk. It was really interesting to hear that. And I have a question, because you touched on that yourself, that it takes a lot of time to create those prompts. You said yourself it took 20 minutes to create that one prompt and to ask it to ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, at what point does it make sense to actually spend that much time in ChatGPT instead of just writing out the copy yourself and just hoping that it will be good enough?
Yeah, it's a very valid question. For me as a content designer, a lot of the time I have other tools, techniques in my toolkit outside of AI that let me generate content a lot faster. So I personally maybe wouldn't rely on these techniques as much. However, not everyone is as confident a writer, and as we saw at the beginning, a lot of people who aren't dedicated content designers, who maybe don't have backgrounds in writing, will have to write content at some stage. So we find these techniques really helpful for guiding people who maybe are less confident in writing, or also have to generate content in a language that they're not super confident in, or it isn't their native language. For example, English. I've used these techniques in German, for example, to generate German content. And it can be helpful for helping them arrive at better words than maybe they would feel able to without AI. I also have to say, as a content designer, sometimes I just have writer's block. Sometimes it's one of those days where I think, oh my God, I don't know what the right words for this button are. This button has 20 different acceptance criteria, and that's where actually I can use AI, and just sometimes writing the prompt and using these techniques can help get me unstuck, and it's almost more valuable to actually sit there and write the prompt than the output is. So I think it's primarily for people who are maybe outside of content design, also content designers in some contexts, and also all of the stuff here, once you've created it, it is a time investment, but then you can reuse it as well. So the effort kind of pays off in the end. Thank you for the question.
OK. Thank you very much, Ben. And yeah, let's give Ben one more round of applause. Thank you.